Purdue Pegboard Test by Julius Bourbon, Colton Fleck, Charlene Kim, and Michelle Moon.
The Purdue Pegboard test is a standardized test that measures unimanual and bimanual finger and hand dexterity and coordination. It aids in the selection and rehabilitation of employees for various types of manual labor by measuring two types of dexterity. This includes gross movements of the fingers, hands, and arms, as well as the fine fingertip dexterity in assembly tasks. The Purdue Pegboard test has also been used for neuropsychological assessments to assist in localizing cerebral lesions and deficits. Here are the materials needed to administer the Purdue Pegboard test. The original population for the Purdue Pegboard test was administered to industrial workers to assess their dexterity. However, throughout the years, it has been tested within various populations, including children and adolescents, and clients ranging from ages 5 to 89 years old. This test can benefit patients with impairments of the upper extremity resulting from neurological and musculoskeletal conditions, as well as diagnoses such as Parkinson's disease. The setting in which the Purdue Pegboard test can be administered to include, but are not limited to, workplace settings, clinical settings, pediatric clinics, schools, inpatient and outpatient rehabs, and private practices. The PPT can also be administered individually or in a group setting. There has also been research conducted with this test to check bilateral and unilateral coordination of the hands.
The current cost for the Purdue Pegboard test, specifically from the online source of Lafayette Instrument Company, is at $125, but at its original price, it's $160. Other sources may vary in prices, ranging from $110 to $160. What does the PPT assess? It measures the motor performance skills in the upper extremities, specifically the gross motor coordination movements of hands, fingers, and arms. It also assesses fine motor movements, particularly measuring fingertip dexterity. Adequate fine motor skills is important in the performance of almost all areas of occupations, such as ADLs, IADLs, education, work, leisure, and play.
How to administer the Purdue Pegboard test. The Purdue Pegboard test assessment is comprised of 5 subtests done in the following order. Now, the purpose of these subtests is to observe how many pins the client is able to place into the pegboard within the time frame. We'll be observing the right hand, the left hand, and then both hands. The 4th subtest is just a calculation of the 3 previous subtests. And lastly is the assembly task, where we'll be counting the total number of pins, washers, and collars that were placed into the pegboard, and more detail will follow throughout this presentation about these tests.
Okay, so for these next few slides, we're going to have some test procedures that we're going to go over, and we're going to have a video demonstration in between some of these slides, but we're going to go over the first couple procedures first. So first off, the client should be comfortably seated at the testing table directly in front of the Purdue Pegboard. Next, the clinician will have pins, collars, and washers placed in the designated cups. You're going to have 25 pins on the far right and left cups, 40 washers on the center right cup, and 20 collars on the center left cup. The OT is going to introduce themselves and the purpose of why we're using this, and then they're going to provide general instructions.
Good morning, Julius. My name is Charlene, and I will be your occupational therapist. Now, today's session, we will be conducting the Purdue Pegboard for you in order to assess the dexterity of both of your hands. The Purdue Pegboard is a test to see how quickly and accurately you can work with your hands. Before you begin each battery of the test, you will be told what to do, and then you will have an opportunity to practice. Be sure you understand exactly what to do.
Sounds great. For the next couple of procedures, the OT will instruct and demonstrate to the client the first subtest with the right hand. The client is to start placing each pin starting at the top right hand row. If during the testing time the client drops a pin, he or she should not stop to pick it up. Instead, they should continue by picking another pin out of the cup. Client practices and demonstrates understanding of the instructions. The OT is going to begin the assessment and times for exactly 30 seconds. During this time, the OT is going to be writing down the client's score.
Okay, Julius, I'm going to demonstrate to you on what I'd like you to do for this assessment. So I would first like you to take your right hand and then pick up one of these pins and place it at the top of the row on the right hand side. And as you go through this assessment, I'd like you to just quickly put a pin as fast as you can in this row without stopping. And if you end up dropping one of these pins, you can just ignore that pin and just keep going forward with that.
All right, makes sense. Thank you.
Oh no, we'll just keep it to the right hand side for your right hand. Oh, you can ignore that and leave it. Thank you.
Okay, let's do this one more time so you can understand the procedure. Okay, stop. Now take out the practice pins and put them back in the right-handed cup. You did a great job.
Thank you.
Okay, when I say begin, place as many pins as possible in the right-handed row, starting with the top hole. Work as rapidly as you can until I say stop. Are you ready?
I'm ready.
Okay, now begin. Okay, stop. Okay, perfect. And then I will write your score down here.
For the next testing procedure, we're going to be going over the left hand, and we're going to be using the same instructions as we did the right hand. The OT will instruct and demonstrate to the client the second test with the left hand. The client is to start placing each pin starting at the top left-handed row. If during the testing time the pin drops, they should not stop to pick it up, but instead they should continue by picking another pin out of the cup. The client is to demonstrate an understanding of the instructions just like before. The OT will begin the assessment. Again, they're going to time for exactly 30 seconds, and then the OT will begin to write down the score. The next set of procedures is going to be testing both hands. The OT will instruct and demonstrate to the client the third test, which will again incorporate both hands. The client is instructed to use both hands at the same time. Client is to pick up the pins at the same time and place right hand pins on the right column and the left hand pins on the left column, placing the pins down the row beginning with the top row. The client is allowed to practice 3 to 4 rows as the OT can correct any errors. Again, the client is going to demonstrate the understanding of the instructions. We're going to begin with the assessment. The OT is going to time for 30 seconds, and then the OT is going to write the score down. To score for this test, the sum of scores obtained from combining the previous 3 tests are collected from the right hand, the left hand, and both hands. The score does not need to be scored immediately and can be scored after the assembly task. Assembly test procedures. This test consists of using both hands to assemble pins, collars, and washers. Both hands should be operating at all times. The OT is to instruct and demonstrate the assembly task to the client. The client is to practice this 4 to 5 complete assemblies before the test begins. The client demonstrates clear understanding of the test. The OT is to begin assessment and time for exactly 60 seconds, and during this time, the OT will keep score.
For the next part of this assessment, we'll be combining all of these pins together, pin, washer, and collar. So since you are right hand dominant, we'll go with starting with your right hand, picking up the pin and placing it on the top row, but at the same time, you'll be placing the washer next, and the collar after, and the washer last. So for this demonstration, you'll be constantly moving your hands, assembling this structure as fast as you can in the same alternating pattern with pin, washer, collar, and washer. Okay, Julius, let's practice a few of them just to see if you can understand the assembly of these parts.
All right.
Okay, That's great. It looks like you got the pin, then the washer, collar, and washer pattern going. That's great. You fully understand what to do with this assessment. Okay, when I say begin, make as many assemblies as possible, beginning with the top of the row right here, and work quickly until I say stop, okay?
Sounds good.
And are you ready?
I'm ready.
1, 2, 3, and start. And stop right there. Okay, thank you for completing this assessment.
Yeah, of course.
To interpret the findings for this assessment, you're going to look at the scores that were derived from each subtest. For both the right hand and the left hand tests, you're going to count the total number of pins that were placed into the respective columns within 30 seconds. For the third subtest, when looking at both hands, you're going to total up the number of pairs of pins that were placed into both columns within 30 seconds. The fourth subtest, you're going to add up the scores from the right hand, left hand, and both hand subtests to get that calculation. And lastly, the assembly subtest, you'll count the number of pins, washers, and collars that were assembled within 60 seconds. Here is an example of how to score this assessment. Based on the first picture, the client had just finished the right and left hand subtest. Counting all the pins on the right column, the client had gotten 17 pins placed, and the second column to the left, the client had gotten 16 as a total if you count them all up. The second picture is the both hands subtest, and now you're counting the pairs of the pins placed in both columns, and the client had gotten a score of 13. The fourth subtest, you're totaling up the previous three subtest scores, so 17, 16, 13, add it all up to get 46. And lastly is the assembly task, where you're counting all the components that were placed into the column, and that is 39.
It is essential to have adequate fine motor dexterity in the performance of almost all areas of occupations. In the PPT, having the skill to use fine motor dexterity determines the client's ability to do work-related tasks such as assembling small pieces of an equipment and wiring electrical circuits. Fine motor and finger dexterity can also be needed for leisure activities such as baiting a hook or making jewelry. When compared to other dexterity tests, the PPT demands more cognitive speed and attention control, which makes it relevant for predicting complex dexterity function in daily life. The PPT taps not only motor dexterity, but also the cognitive speed needed for good social or occupational functioning. The literature about PPT states that a faster performance is associated with better social functioning in patients with schizophrenia and with good vocational outcome after TBI in children and adults.